Some of you probably aren't going to like what I have to say. Many of you are going to be challenged to think outside of the box just a little bit, which is good. It's always good to surround yourself with people who make you think beyond your own abilities. What is up? Welcome back to the channel. It has been a couple of days since we posted a video. I've been trying to get out and do stuff. It has been raining like crazy here, which really just shuts down my ability to record out on the farm. We got a lot of stuff to show you guys, but today we're going to sit and talk about the situation over in Seattle. We're going to be talking about Chaz or Chop or whatever they're calling it these days. Hopefully maybe give you guys kind of a different insight on it. I don't know. I think a lot of people are initially pretty pissed off about what is taking place. Many of us see it as, you're invading the U.S., you're creating sovereign territory, you're becoming a different country, essentially, right? Sovereign land, a sovereign nation, I guess. I don't know. Many of you are calling for government interference on a federal level, right? Having the federal government come in and drop a bomb on them, right? Like Nagasaki. Or have the local government take care of it as well, be it the governor or the mayor, right? That's kind of where we're at. That's a lot of what we're seeing. What I'm not seeing a ton of is support for what is taking place. But I want to give you guys my thoughts. I don't necessarily support it, but I'm also not, I'm not really in favor of the government coming and doing anything about it. So we're going to talk about it. It's going to be a little interesting. One thing I want to point out before you guys check out of this video, because you realize I'm probably not calling for them to drop bombs. I think that this is a trap. I think that we're gonna call it Chaz because I like Chaz better than Chop, and I do what I want. I think Chaz is a setup. I think it's a trap for the federal government. I think it's a trap for we the people. I think it's a trap for the president, and I'm going to tell you why. You guys let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know if you don't agree with me, and then if you agree with me afterwards. But I think it is a trap. Here is why. So when Obama was in office, Obama signed an agreement with the United Nations to allow the United Nations to come in unobstructed into the U.S. to protect the citizenry of the United States from the federal government if ever need be. Okay, so he laid the tracks for the train coming through. Now, here's what needs to happen for that to take place. So many of you probably don't know that, right? You probably don't know that the United Nations got an executive order signed to be able to come into the U.S. and operate, right? Like, we are going to allow essentially a foreign government. It's a coalition of governments, but essentially a foreign government and a foreign military to come in on American soil. So one, they're allowed to. Two, the American people are allowed to defend themselves. Remember that. Three, the American people have overthrown governments in the past, and foreign governments coming in, take heed. Because just because you're allowed to be here doesn't mean we won't kick you out. But here's the issue. The wording that's being used, right? The protect the citizenry of the United States, okay? Now that Chaz is accepted by the Washington state governor, the Seattle mayor, and the president is calling for them to get rid of them, means a couple of options. It means that National Guard might be deployed to take back the area that was taken from the United States. Two is deploy American troops. Posse Comitatus was suspended during these riots, which means they used the Insurrection Act to suspend it, which means that they can deploy military, United States military, on home soil. So we're not talking about National Guard. We're now talking about, I believe they were talking about the MP. There's an MP. I don't know who it was. I don't know if it was Marines or Army. someone was going to be coming in to deal with the stuff as well. They were the military police. So there's that. So the MPs could come over and take care of it as well. But then you have American military. Here's where it gets kind of weird as I talk about it. You have American military going into Seattle, but it's no longer American citizenry in Seattle. They're not Americans anymore. They've declared themselves not a part of the U.S. So I guess that means that they would not be protected by this, which means the United Nations couldn't necessarily come in because it's not a tyrannical federal government that is harming the American people. It's now the federal government retaking back land from non-Americans. That could be their loophole. That might be their downfall. I just thought about this, guys, while we were talking about that. I've been pondering this for quite some time. I wanted to make this video to talk to you guys about it. And now as I just say that in my head, I might be wrong. I could be wrong on the way that I was looking at this. Whereas before the UN would be allowed to come in to protect American citizens, these people have declared themselves non-Americans anymore, sovereign from America, sovereign from the US, which would nullify their classification, meaning they are no longer due any type of protection, which means they would need to form their own protection, which means these people might be in some trouble. But we know that the rule of law in this country is gone. We know that justice doesn't necessarily take place. So we could still see United Nations come in under the guise of the protection for Chaz to come in, maybe set up a perimeter around Chaz, which would cause a conflict between the United Nations and the federal government. The federal government would probably then come in and create a perimeter around the United Nations. Meanwhile, us Americans are sitting back like, oh lordy, what's about to take place? So it's something that we all need to be aware of, because it's all just a flashpoint away from starting everything, right? But to get to the point of should it be allowed, a bunch of American citizens got together and said, we're done with the federal government's BS. This zone is abolished. We're abolishing your tyrannical government. We no longer want it. And now we are setting up a new government. Guys, our Constitution allows for that. Our Constitution allows for them to do that. Maybe not in that way, but our Constitution allows for us to set up a new government and abolish a tyrannical government. We set it up that way because that's who we were getting rid of in the beginning, right? But you need ability to fight that government. You need the ability to not get steamrolled, which means enter in the United Nations. You now no longer get to just steamroll these people in this 6-block radius, 10-block radius, whatever. You now have to play a different game, because if you go against the United Nations, albeit on American soil, it sparks something. And I think that this is why we are not seeing any action from the federal government thus far. We're not... And I know many of you called me stupid thinking the federal government's not involved. Yes, I'm aware that they probably have feds walking around inside Chaz, taking notes. I get it, guys. My point was that there's no obvious response. Other than Trump saying get rid of it or we will, there has been no show of force yet. So will we see it? Should we see it? Should we respect the fact that these people did what many of us actually want to do? Many people in the Patriot community dislike tyrannical government as well as the control of a lot of their stuff, right? And I'm not above taking a stand and giving the finger to the government when I don't like their communist tendencies, right? I disagree with having to ask for permits to do shit on my property. and the local government's communist and they want money for that kind of stuff, which means that somehow they control my land. I don't, right? So if we're talking about freedom from tyranny, freedom from communism, we need to start locally and from the top down, right? It's 100%. It's a blanket, right? You're either a free man or you're not. So asking for permission to do stuff on our own land gets a lot of us riled up. And yet here these people are saying, okay, we're done being victims of your tyranny. And so we're not going to play your game. And they did it. So will we see more of it in the future? Will we see more of these groups say, wait a minute, we should not be hating on this group. We should be taking notes and implementing our own zones of freedom. This might be the spark, guys, that takes the American people a second to realize, hey, these guys over here, although they're funny looking, right? Although they're nerdy looking people who dress real creepy, although they're different, they might be right. And we might need to take the time to look at it and say, they're not the enemy and they're not the problem. These people might have just found the solution.